Hey everyone, and welcome to our little quiet corner of history. Tonight, we're drifting back to a time long before air conditioning units hummed us to sleep. A time when summer wasn't just a season for vacations, but a very real, very warm challenge. We're talking about ancient Rome. How did they possibly manage those scorching Mediterranean summers without so much as a single electric fan? Thinking about it, if you were dropped into a Roman August, you'd probably find coping with the heat a far more pressing concern than, say, remembering your Latin declensions. It makes our modern grumbles about a broken AC seem a tad, well, modern, doesn't it? Before we wander down those sun-baked Roman roads, if you enjoy these gentle explorations of the past, maybe give that like button a little tap, or consider subscribing so we can continue these journeys together. I always love hearing where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world, so feel free to share in the comments below. Perhaps you've already dimmed the lights, maybe there's a soft rain outside your window, or just the quiet hum of the night. Alright, let the lights dim a little further. Let's drift together into the warmth of an ancient summer. The city of Rome, a sprawling metropolis even by ancient standards, was a crucible in the summer months. Nestled amongst its famous 7 hills, the urban landscape of tightly packed insulae, those multi-story apartment buildings, along with a dense population, created what we now call a significant urban heat island effect. The narrow, winding streets, while offering some shade at certain times of day, also trapped heat radiating from the stone and terracotta. Sunlight would beat down on the tiled roofs, the paved roads, and the grand marble facades of public buildings, storing warmth that would linger long into the night. Imagine the air, thick not just with the usual city smells of cooking fires, animals, and humanity, but with a kind underscore of oppressive, still heat, especially in the lower-lying areas between the hills or in the crowded suburban district. The months of July and August, in particular, were notorious. Ancient writers often referred to the estes, the summer heat, with a certain weary respect. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a force of nature that shaped daily life, work, and even health. For the million or so inhabitants during the imperial period, from the wealthiest senator to the poorest laborer, summer presented a common adversary, though their means of combating it varied wildly, of course. The very construction of the city, while magnificent, often exacerbated the problem. Large public squares, like the Forum Romanum, could become sun traps, their open expanses reflecting glare and heat. While grand temples and basilicas offered some respite within their massive stone walls, the journey to and from them was often an ordeal. Yet, the Romans were nothing if not pragmatic and observant. Over centuries, they developed architectural strategies and urban planning elements, some perhaps by design for coolness, others as fortunate byproducts of their building practices, that offered some mitigation. The famed Roman concrete, opus cementitium, while revolutionary for its structural capabilities, also possessed a certain thermal mass. Thick walls, common in both public buildings and the domus, the single-family homes of the better off, would absorb heat slowly during the day and release it gradually at night. This could mean cooler interiors during the hottest part of the day, though it also meant that buildings might retain warmth longer after sunset if not well ventilated. Windows, often small and strategically placed high on walls, were not typically glazed with glass as we know it, especially in poorer dwellings. Instead, they might have wooden shutters, or fabric coverings, or simply be left open. This was a double-edged sword. It allowed for some air circulation but also let in dust, noise, and of course, more heat if not positioned correctly to capture breezes or to remain in shade. The orientation of buildings, where possible, also played a role. Wealthier homeowners might design their domus with summer and winter triclinia, dining rooms, choosing their location within the house based on sun exposure at different times of the year. One of the most iconic features of Roman domestic architecture, particularly in the domus and villas, was the peristyle courtyard. This open-air garden, surrounded by a covered colonnade, was a haven of relative coolness. The columns provided shade, the plants and water features, perhaps a small fountain or a fish pond, contributed to evaporative cooling, and the open space itself allowed for air to circulate more freely than in the enclosed rooms. Even in the more cramped insulae, small internal courtyards or light wells existed, though they were often less salubrious and offered more limited relief. The very materials used in construction were also considered. Stone, such as travertine or tufa, and fired bricks were common, and their ability to absorb and radiate heat was an unavoidable factor. Roofs were typically covered with terracotta tiles, which, while durable, would bake under the sun. Some wealthier residences might have had more elaborate roofing systems or even rooftop gardens, which could provide a degree of insulation. The height of ceilings, too, could make a difference. Higher ceilings in the more spacious rooms of a domus allowed hot air to rise, making the lower part of the room feel cooler. Public spaces also incorporated elements that, intentionally or not, helped. The extensive porticos that line many streets and public squares offered shaded walkways, a vital feature for pedestrians. Think of the Porticus of Livia or the Porticus Aemilia. These weren't just architectural embellishments. They were practical solutions for moving around the city under the relentless sun. The presence of trees, where they existed in planned gardens or sacred groves, also offered natural shade and a slightly cooler microclimate. Scholars still debate how consciously climate-adapted Roman architecture was beyond the obvious benefits of shade and ventilation inherent in some designs, but the lived experience of Romans clearly led to certain preferred forms and features that made the summer marginally more bearable. Some evidence suggests that even the alignment of certain streets, or the placement of public fountains might have considered prevailing winds or sun angles, though this is harder to prove definitively across the board. What is clear is that the physical environment of a Roman city in summer was a defining characteristic of life. Now, picture yourself arriving in Rome for the first time. It's mid-July. As your cart rattles over the uneven paving stones just inside the city gates, the first thing that hits you isn't the grandeur, though that's there, looming in the distance. It's the heat. A thick, palpable wave of it, carrying 1,000 unfamiliar scents. Baking bread from a nearby pastrinum, the sharp tang of wine from a street-side popina, the less pleasant aroma of refuse in a gutter, all overlaid with the dust kicked up by countless feet and wheels. You've been traveling for weeks, perhaps from a cooler, greener province, and this concentrated warmth feels like stepping into an oven. Your tunic, which felt perfectly comfortable an hour ago in the more open countryside, now clings to your back. You fan yourself with your hand, a useless gesture against the sheer intensity. You look around, trying to get your bearings, and your eyes are drawn upwards. The buildings here are tall, much taller than you're used to, leaning in towards each other across narrow, shadowy streets. These are the famous insulae, the apartment blocks you've heard about. Some have balconies, festooned with laundry or wilting plants in pots. Tiny windows, like dark eyes, stare out from the upper floors. You notice that many of them have their wooden shutters closed tight against the sun, creating an almost cave-like darkness within. You can hear the murmur of life from behind those shutters, a baby crying, a heated argument, the clatter of a dropped pot. Occasionally, a gust of slightly cooler air, or perhaps just less hot air, funnels down one of these alleyways, a brief, teasing respite. You see people, lots of people, moving with a kind of practiced slowness. Those who can, stick to the slivers of shade cast by the buildings. Porters, their faces glistening with sweat, carry heavy amphorae on their shoulders, their muscles straining. Children dart in and out of doorways, seemingly oblivious to the furnace-like conditions, their laughter echoing briefly before being swallowed by the general hubbub. As you venture deeper, the streets sometimes open into small squares, and here the sun is merciless. The light reflecting off the pale stone of a fountain or the plastered wall of a temple is almost blinding. You squint, your hand instinctively going up to shield your eyes. You see a vendor under a makeshift awning, selling slices of melon. The sight of its cool, watery flesh makes your mouth dry. You notice how the architecture itself seems to dictate movement. People cluster under the arches of a portico, conducting their business in its relative cool. The steps of a large public building, perhaps a basilica or a library, are crowded not just with those entering or exiting, but with others simply sitting, seeking refuge from the direct sun on its shaded side. You observe the materials, the rougher, darker volcanic stone of the older foundations, the more regular brickwork of newer constructions, the occasional flash of marble that speaks of wealth and importance. You touch a sun-baked wall out of curiosity and quickly pull your hand away. It's surprisingly hot, radiating warmth like a hearth. You begin to understand that surviving here in summer isn't just about enduring. It's about knowing the city's rhythms, its shady nooks, its breezeways, however slight they might be. You see how the very design of the city, with its narrow passages and occasional wider, sun-drenched piazzas, its tall buildings and its shuttered windows, is both a contributor to the heat and a part of the ancient strategy for dealing with it. It's a city that breathes heat, absorbs it, and in its own way, offers little pockets of shelter if you know where to look. Your initial impression is one of overwhelming, almost suffocating warmth, but as you observe, you start to see the subtle adaptations, the human and structural responses to an ever-present summer reality. The engineering marvel of Roman aqueducts is, of course, legendary. These monumental structures, stretching for miles across the countryside, weren't just symbols of Roman power and ingenuity. They were the lifeblood of the city, especially crucial during the sweltering summer months. Over centuries, a network of 11 major aqueducts was constructed, channeling vast quantities of fresh water from distant springs and rivers into Rome. Imagine the sheer scale of this undertaking: gravity-fed channels, sometimes running underground in tunnels, sometimes carried aloft on those iconic stone arches, all converging on the thirsty metropolis. This constant influx of water, estimated by some scholars to be hundreds of millions of liters per day at its peak, was a staggering achievement for the pre-industrial world. It fed the city's numerous public fountains, its grand imperial baths, the private residences of the wealthy, and even some businesses. Without this reliable water supply, Rome as a densely populated city simply couldn't have functioned, let alone survived its intense summers. The water wasn't just for drinking, it was for sanitation, for industry, and critically in summer for cooling. The very sound of water, gushing from a public fountain, splashing in a bathhouse pool, trickling in a private garden, must have been a psychologically cooling balm in the oppressive heat. Public fountains, or fontes, were scattered throughout the city, providing essential access to drinking water for the general populace, particularly those living in insulae who rarely had private water connections. There were hundreds, perhaps over 1,000, of these fountains, ranging from simple spouts to more elaborate, architecturally ornate structures, often adorned with sculptures of gods or mythical creatures. For many Romans, the daily trip to the local fountain to fetch water was a routine chore. But in summer, these locations also became impromptu social hubs and places of brief respite. The cool stone of the fountain basin, the spray from the gushing water, the shade cast by any surrounding structures, all offered a momentary escape from the relentless sun. The quality of water could vary. Some aqueducts delivered purer, colder water than others, and certain fountains were prized for this. The Aqua Marcia, for instance, was renowned for the coldness and clarity of its water. The distribution of this water wasn't always equitable, of course. The wealthy could afford to pay for private connections, piping water directly into their domus, filling their private baths and garden features. For the masses, however, public access was paramount. The cura aquarum, the office responsible for overseeing the water supply, was a vital imperial institution, ensuring the maintenance and fair distribution of this precious resource. Any disruption to the water supply, especially in summer, could quickly lead to hardship and unrest. Beyond basic hydration, the most significant use of water for cooling and leisure was undoubtedly found in the Roman baths, the thermae. These were not mere places to get clean. They were vast public complexes, social and recreational centers that played a central role in Roman daily life. Emperors often funded the construction of enormous thermae, like the baths of Caracalla or Diocletian, as a way to curry favor with the populace. These colossal structures could accommodate thousands of bathers at a time and offered a sophisticated sequence of heated and cooled rooms, exercise areas, libraries, and even gardens. Entry fees were typically very low, sometimes even free, making them accessible to nearly everyone. A visit to the baths was a ritual. One might start in the palestra, exercise yard, engaging in some light sport, then move to the tepidarium, warm room, to acclimatize, followed by the caldarium, hot room, for a steam and a sweat, and finally, the highlight for many in summer, a plunge into the frigidarium, cold pool. The frigidarium, often a large, unheated pool, sometimes open to the sky or covered with a high vaulted ceiling, offered an incredibly welcome shock of coolness after the heat of the other rooms and the baking streets outside. Imagine the echoing splashes, the chatter of voices, the feeling of cool water enveloping a heat-weary body. It was a sensory experience, as much as a physical one. Some baths even had natations, large open-air swimming pools. These bath complexes were architectural marvels in themselves, with vast domed ceilings, intricate mosaics, marble-lined walls, and large windows designed to capture light, though perhaps less strategically for keeping out summer heat in all areas. The sheer volume of water used and the engineering required to heat and circulate it were immense. While the heated rooms might seem counterintuitive for summer, the Romans believed in the therapeutic value of sweating to cleanse the body, and the subsequent immersion in cold water was all the more invigorating. Even in private homes, water was a key element for comfort. The peristyle courtyards of the wealthy often featured fountains, pools, impluvia that collected rainwater, or more elaborate piscini, and carefully irrigated plantings. The sight and sound of water, combined with the shade of the colonnade and the evaporative cooling effect of plants and damp surfaces, could make these courtyards significantly cooler than the surrounding rooms or the streets outside. Some luxurious villas even had nymphia, ornamental grottos dedicated to nymphs, often featuring elaborate water displays and designed specifically as cool retreats. These were, of course, far beyond the reach of the average Roman, but they illustrate the high value placed on water as a cooling agent. The very act of sprinkling water on floors, a common practice, could also help to lower the temperature locally through evaporation. So, water was not just a utility. It was an integral part of the Roman strategy for managing summer, woven into the fabric of their city and their daily routines, a constant reminder of both nature's power and humanity's ingenuity in harnessing it. Now, let's imagine you, still feeling the oppressive weight of the Roman summer, making your way through the city. The sun is climbing higher, and the slivers of shade you found earlier are shrinking. Your throat is dry, and the heat seems to radiate from the very stones beneath your sandals. You see others, their faces flushed, making their way with a determined air towards the telltale sound of splashing water. You follow, drawn by an instinctual need for relief. The narrow street opens a little, and there it is, a public fountain. It's not grand, just a carved stone lion's head, its mouth spewing a steady stream of clear water into a warm basin below. A small crowd is gathered. Children are daring each other to dash through the spray, their shrieks of laughter momentarily cutting through the city's drone. Women with clay jugs wait their turn, chatting quietly. An old man cups his hands, drinking deeply, water trickling through his beard. You approach, feeling the cool mist on your skin even before you reach the basin. The stone itself is cool and damp to the touch. When your turn comes, you plunge your hands into the collected water, then splash it onto your face and neck. It's a shock, a blissful, momentary reprieve. The water tastes clean and cold, a welcome contrast to the warm, dusty air you've been breathing. You drink until your thirst is quenched, a small, essential comfort in the overwhelming heat. For a few precious moments, standing by the fountain, feeling the dampness and hearing the constant flow, the city's oppression lessens. Later in the day, perhaps after the main heat has peaked, you decide to experience what you've heard so much about, the public baths. You pay your small quadrant's coin at the entrance of a moderately sized neighborhood therme, not one of the colossal imperial ones, but still impressive. The air inside is immediately different, humid, filled with the murmur of voices, the slap of bare feet on wet stone, and the distant sound of splashing. You navigate through a series of rooms. First, the changing room, the apoditerium, where you leave your tunic in a small niche, feeling a little exposed but also freer. Then, perhaps you brave the tepidarium, a warm, steamy room where people are lounging on benches, their bodies gleaming with oil and sweat. The heat here is gentle, preparatory. Some are chatting, others are quiet, simply letting the warmth seep in. You might then glance into the caldarium, the hot room. The air is thick with steam, the temperature intense. Through the haze, you see figures reclining, some being scraped with strigils by slaves or friends to remove dirt and oil. It seems too much for this summer day, so you bypass it, your destination clear in your mind. Finally, you reach the frigidarium. And it is a revelation. It's a large hall, the ceiling high above, perhaps with an oculus open to the sky, through which a shaft of late afternoon sun illuminates the water's surface. The pool itself is expansive, its water still and invitingly cool. The sound here is more energetic, people laughing, diving in with loud splashes, the joyful shouts of those already immersed. You walk to the edge, the mosaic tiles cool under your feet. You dip a toe in, it's shockingly cold, but in the most wonderful way. Taking a breath, you descend the steps and slide into the water. The relief is instantaneous and absolute. The heat that has clung to you all day seems to dissolve, washed away. You push off from the side, the water buoying you, cool and silky against your skin. Around you, Romans of all sorts are enjoying the same sensation. A group of young men are boisterously playing some water game. A couple of older men are discussing business, waist-deep near the edge. A mother gently coaxes her child into the shallower end. It's a communal experience, a shared escape. You float for a while, looking up at the vast ceiling or the patch of sky, feeling the city's relentless energy temporarily held at bay by these cool, watery walls. The frigidarium isn't just a cold pool, it's a sanctuary, a vital part of how this city and its people endure, and even find joy, in the face of the summer's siege. As you eventually emerge, your skin tingling and cool, the air outside the baths, though still warm, feels somehow less aggressive, more manageable. You feel refreshed, revived, ready to face the evening, carrying the memory of that cool embrace with you. The Roman workday, for many, began very early. Long before dawn, the city would start to stir. Bakers would be firing their ovens, laborers heading to construction sites or the docks, and shopkeepers preparing to open their stalls. This early start was a practical response to the Mediterranean climate. By getting much of their strenuous work done in the cooler morning hours, Romans could avoid the worst of the midday heat. Business in the forum, legal proceedings, and various public duties would also commence early. As the sun climbed higher and its intensity grew, the pace of life would noticeably slow. By noon, or shortly thereafter, a distinct lull would fall over the city. This was the time for the prandium, a light midday meal, often followed by a period of rest known as the meridiatio, or midday nap, the ancestor of the siesta still practiced in many Mediterranean countries today. For those who could afford it, and even for many laborers whose overseers recognized the drop in productivity under the blazing sun, this afternoon repose was a sensible and widespread custom. Streets would become quieter, shops might close or be tended by sleepy apprentices, and those with homes would retreat indoors, seeking the coolest spot they could find. Even public life would pause, with most official business concluding before the hottest part of the day. This wasn't laziness. It was a deeply ingrained adaptation, a way of conserving energy and avoiding heat stroke in an era without artificial cooling. Work might resume in the late afternoon as the temperature began to dip, or the rest of the day might be given over to leisure, such as a visit to the baths, or social calls as evening approached. Clothing, too, was suited to the climate, though perhaps not always with overt fashion choices dictating coolness as we might think today. The basic garments for most Romans were the tunic, and, for citizens in public, the toga. Tunics, simple T-shaped garments usually made of wool or linen, were relatively loose-fitting. Linen, being lighter and more breathable than wool, was undoubtedly preferred in summer when available and affordable. Wealthier individuals might have finer quality linen, perhaps even imported cotton from Egypt or India, which would have been exceptionally comfortable in the heat. The toga, the voluminous draped garment symbolizing Roman citizenship, was typically made of wool. While majestic, it could be quite heavy and cumbersome, especially in summer. One can imagine senators and officials enduring its weight with a certain stoicism, perhaps opting for lighter weight wool if possible. For everyday activities, especially for those not engaged in formal public life, a simple tunic would suffice. Women wore a stola, a long pleated dress worn over an inner tunic, and when outdoors, a palla, a rectangular shawl that could be draped in various ways, including over the head for shade. The general principle was for clothing to be relatively unrestrictive, allowing for some air circulation. Colors might also have played a small role. While vibrant dyes were prized, lighter colored fabrics naturally absorbed less heat than darker ones, a simple physical fact the Romans would have experienced even if not always explicitly articulating it as a cooling strategy in their choice of ceremonial or status-driven attire. Bare feet or simple sandals, soli or sandalia, were common footwear, practical for the warm climate and allowing feet to breathe. Dietary habits also shifted in the summer. While Romans enjoyed robust flavors, summer meals, particularly the midday prandium, tended to be lighter. Fresh fruits were abundant and popular. Figs, grapes, melons, and various berries would have been welcome, providing hydration and a refreshing sweetness. Vegetables, salads, cheese, and bread formed staples. Cool or room temperature dishes were preferred over heavy, hot meals during the peak of the day. Think of a simple meal: a piece of bread, some olives, a hunk of cheese, and a handful of ripe figs, perhaps washed down with watered wine. Wine was a ubiquitous drink in the Roman world, but it was almost always diluted with water, often cool water fetched from a spring or stored in porous earthenware jars that allowed for some evaporative cooling. The practice of mixing wine with snow or iced water, sourced with considerable effort and expense from mountain snows preserved in insulated pits, was a luxury enjoyed by the very wealthy, a testament to their desire for chilled refreshment. Beer, cervigia, was known but considered somewhat barbaric and less common in Rome itself compared to the northern provinces. Water, of course, remained the most crucial drink for hydration. Some ancient writers even offer recipes for cooling drinks, sometimes involving fruit juices or infusions of herbs. The avoidance of overly rich or spicy foods during the hottest periods was also a likely, if unstated, practice for general comfort. Beyond these broader adjustments to daily life, Romans employed more direct, personal methods for seeking relief. The most obvious and simple was seeking shade. As you observed on your imagined arrival, porticos, colonnades, and even the narrow shaded sides of streets were valuable commodities. People would naturally gravitate towards these cooler spots. Inside homes, rooms with fewer windows or those facing away from the direct sun would be preferred during the day. Heavy curtains or drapes, if owned, could also block some sunlight and heat. Handheld fans, known as flabella, were certainly used, particularly by wealthier individuals. These were often made of light wood, parchment, or peacock feathers, and would be waved by the user or, for the very affluent, by a slave, to create a cooling breeze. Imagine a Roman matron reclining on her lectus during the afternoon heat, a young slave boy or girl diligently, rhythmically waving a colorful flabellum beside her. It wasn't air conditioning, but the gentle movement of air could provide significant comfort by aiding evaporation from the skin. Parasols, or umbracula, similar to umbrellas but used for sun protection, were also known, typically used by women of higher status to shield themselves from the sun when outdoors. These would have been particularly useful during processions or when attending outdoor events. Evidence for these comes from art, such as mosaics and frescoes, and from literature. While not a universal solution, these personal items represented a direct attempt to mitigate the sun's impact and create a more comfortable personal microclimate. Sometimes, simply dampening a cloth with cool water and applying it to the forehead or neck would have been a common-sense measure, much as it is today. The ingenuity lay not in complex technology, but in the resourceful use of simple materials and an understanding of basic physical principles like shade and air movement. Now let yourself drift into a typical Roman summer afternoon. The initial flurry of morning activity has long subsided. The Forum, once bustling with lawyers, merchants, and politicians, is now quieter, shimmering under the high sun. Most sensible folk have retreated indoors. You find yourself in the atrium of a modest domus, perhaps visiting a family friend. The compluvium, the opening in the roof above, lets in a bright shaft of light, but the surrounding rooms, their doors ajar, are mostly in shadow. The air here is still warm, but it lacks the harsh, direct bite of the sun outside. Your host, a man of comfortable but not extravagant means, is reclining on a lectus couch in a shaded corner of the peristyle garden, which you can glimpse through a doorway. He's dressed in a simple linen tunic, his sandals discarded beside the couch. He gestures for you to join him. "The sun is fierce today," he murmurs, his voice a little sleepy. "Only mad dogs and, well, perhaps some determined Gauls out in this heat." You smile, understanding the sentiment. A young slave girl, no more than 10, quietly enters the peristyle, refills a small earthenware jug from a larger amphora stored in a cool, dark alcove, and brings it to your host. He pours some of the contents into 2 simple cups. It's water, refreshingly cool, not icy, but certainly not the tepid stuff you might find in a sun-baked puddle. He offers you a cup. "From the Aqua Marcia," he says with a hint of pride. "Still the best, wouldn't you agree?" You sip it gratefully. The coolness spreads through you, a small but significant comfort. You notice a flabellum made of brightly dyed feathers lying on a small table. He probably had one of the household slaves fanning him earlier before he dozed off. You settle onto a sturdy wooden chair placed in the shade of a fig tree growing in the courtyard. The leaves rustle faintly, creating a dappled light on the mosaic floor. The scent of herbs from a small planted bed mixes with the damp earthiness of the watered plants. From somewhere deeper in the house, you hear the low hum of someone singing, a lullaby perhaps. The city outside feels distant, its usual clamor muted. This is the meridiatio, the sacred pause. You lean your head back. The warmth is still present, a constant companion, but here, in the shade, with a cool drink in the stillness of the afternoon, it's bearable, almost soporific. You can understand why the Romans embraced this midday rest. It's not just about avoiding the heat, it's about aligning with the natural rhythm of the day, a rhythm dictated by the powerful Mediterranean sun. You might see a cat stretched out, fast asleep, in a patch of shade, the picture of contentment. Or perhaps you notice the way the light falls through the colonnade, changing subtly as the afternoon wears on, a slow, silent clock. There's a profound sense of peace in this enforced inactivity. Your own eyelids feel heavy. The sounds are gentle. The buzzing of a bee near the herbs, the distant cooing of a dove, the occasional soft footfall from within the house. It's a world away from the glare and dust of the streets you walked earlier. This is how a significant part of Roman society navigated the summer. By yielding to it. By creating these small oases of calm and coolness within their daily lives, using simple means and the wisdom of routine. While the midday siesta, public fountains, and baths offered some measure of relief to Rome's general populace, for the truly wealthy, the senatorial class, successful merchants, and powerful officials, summer often meant an escape from the city altogether. Rome, for all its grandeur, could become intensely uncomfortable, noisy, and arguably less healthy during the hottest months, a phenomenon ancient writers like Horace and Juvenal sometimes lamented. Thus, a seasonal migration to cooler climes was a well-established practice among the elite. Favored destinations included the hills surrounding Rome, such as an ancestral estate in Tusculum or Tiber, modern Tivoli, where the altitude offered fresher air and cooler temperatures. Even more popular were coastal retreats, particularly along the Bay of Naples, places like Baiae, Puteoli, and Cumae, which boasted refreshing sea breezes and a vibrant, if sometimes decadent, resort atmosphere. Pliny the Younger, in his letters, provides detailed descriptions of his own villas, one in Tuscany, the Tuscan Villa, and another by the sea at Laurentum. These weren't just houses. They were sprawling complexes designed for leisure, intellectual pursuits, and crucially, comfort in all seasons. His Laurentine villa, for instance, had rooms specifically oriented to catch winter sun or summer breezes, shaded porticos, and views of the sea. The level of luxury and the sophistication of cooling methods available at these countryside and seaside villas were, of course, far beyond anything the average city dweller could imagine. Peristyle gardens were larger and more elaborate, often featuring extensive water channels, multiple fountains, and even grottos or nymphea. These nymphea were artificial caves, often sumptuously decorated with mosaics and shells, and ingeniously supplied with running water that trickled over surfaces, creating a cool, damp, and shaded sanctuary. The sound of water, combined with the shade and evaporation, would have made these spaces significantly cooler than the ambient temperature. Some villas might have had rooms with north-facing aspects, designed to minimize sun exposure, or with especially thick walls and high ceilings. The strategic planting of large shade trees, plane trees, were particularly favored for their broad leaves and dense shade. Around the villa and in its gardens was another common practice. Slaves played a crucial role in maintaining this comfort. Apart from the constant task of fetching and carrying cool water, they would be employed to sprinkle water on floors and hang damp mats or fabric in doorways to cool incoming air through evaporation. And of course, the personal flabellum, the handheld fan, would be in constant use, wielded by slaves to create a breeze for their reclining masters and mistresses. There's even some, albeit debated, evidence for rudimentary forms of air conditioning, where cool air from underground cellars or from over water channels might have been ducted into living spaces, though this was likely extremely rare and complex. The very wealthy might also have enjoyed the luxury of snow, laboriously transported from distant mountains and stored in insulated pits, to chill their wine and food, a practice that underscores the lengths they would go to for relief from the heat. This starkly contrasted with the experience of the urban plebs. For the hundreds of thousands living in crowded insulae, escape to a countryside villa was an impossible dream. Their strategies were more communal and relied on the public amenities the city offered or simple, age-old adaptations. They sought shade under public porticos, in the less sun-exposed alleyways, or perhaps spent more time in the cooler, stone-built ground-floor taverns and shops if they could. The public baths, with their cheap entry, were a godsend. The banks of the Tiber River, despite its often polluted waters, might have offered some breezy spots, though it wasn't exactly a picturesque bathing location for most parts within the city. Evening was a particularly important time. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the stone of the city began to release its stored heat, a collective sigh of relief would ripple through the neighborhoods. People would emerge from their stifling apartments, bringing chairs or mats out into the streets or small squares. It was a time for socializing, for sharing news, for children to play in the fading light. The air, though still warm, would be more breathable, and sometimes a gentle breeze might stir. Think of it, the city transforming as dusk falls, the harsh glare replaced by the soft glow of oil lamps from windows and shops, the daytime cacophony softening into a murmur of conversations and the distant sounds of music or laughter. Now, just for a moment, imagine you are not a visitor, but one of these ordinary Romans, a craftsman perhaps, living with your family in a small apartment in the Suburra. The day has been long and hot. Your workshop, even with the shutters mostly closed, felt like an oven. The midday break brought little real coolness, just a torpid stillness. But now, the sun has set. You carry a worn wooden stool out into the narrow street in front of your insula. Your neighbors are doing the same. Children, released from the confines of hot rooms, chase each other, their joyful shrieks echoing off the tall buildings. The air is still thick with the day's accumulated smells, cooking food from various apartments, a whiff of incense from a small household shrine, the ever-present undertone of the city itself. But there's a change, a subtle stirring. A woman from across the way shares a piece of melon with your children. You exchange a few words with the old man who lives downstairs. He's fanning himself slowly with a piece of folded papyrus. There's a sense of shared endurance, of community. This is your nymphaeum, your shaded portico. It's not the luxurious cool of a seaside villa, but it's a collective reclaiming of the city from the tyranny of the sun. You look up. Between the dark masses of the buildings, a few stars are beginning to appear in the deep indigo sky. The day's heat is ebbing, slowly, but surely. There's a quiet understanding that passes between you and your neighbors. Another scorching day survived. The Romans, as a whole, possessed a certain resilience, an acceptance of the natural world and its challenges, including the summer heat. While they developed ingenious ways to mitigate its effects, from grand aqueducts to the simple act of seeking shade, there was also an understanding that summer was a season to be endured, its rhythms to be respected. Their world was not one of instant climate control. Life was lived more in tune with the elements. The heat shaped their architecture, their daily schedules, their social customs, and perhaps even their temperament. It was an annual trial, but also a familiar one, woven into the very fabric of what it meant to live in Rome. There was no escaping it entirely, only ways to make it more bearable, to find those pockets of coolness, whether in the grand frigidarium of an imperial bath, the shaded courtyard of a domus, or simply in the shared camaraderie of an evening street gathering as the city finally began to cool. Their survival without fans, as we know them, was a testament to their adaptability, their engineering prowess, and their deep, practical understanding of their environment. And so, as the last vestiges of twilight deepen over the seven hills, the city of Rome settles into the embrace of a summer night. The moon, perhaps a sliver or a luminous disk, casts pale light onto the ancient stones, softening the sharp edges of temples and triumphal arches. The great forums, once echoing with oratory and commerce, now lie quiet, bathed in silver. From the narrow streets of the Suburra to the grand peristyles of Palatine Hill villas, a comparative stillness descends. The air, though still carrying the warmth of the day, is gentler now. A faint breeze, a mere whisper, might rustle the leaves of the plane trees lining a forgotten avenue, or stir the awnings over silent market stalls. Imagine the sounds of this ancient night: the distant bark of a dog, the soft hoot of an owl from a cypress tree in a nobleman's garden, the murmur of late-night conversations drifting from a window left open to catch any errant coolness. Perhaps the rhythmic clatter of a watchman's sandals on the cobblestones, or the faint, melancholic notes of a flute played by someone unable to sleep, the melody winding its way through the labyrinthine alleys. The grand baths are closed, their water still and reflective under the night sky. The fountains continue their ceaseless song, a cool counterpoint to the city's slumbering warmth, their basins gleaming in the moonlight, offering a silent promise of refreshment for the dawn to come. Think of the countless souls within those walls. Some sleep deeply, exhausted by the day's heat and labor. Others lie awake, perhaps gazing at the stars visible through an unglazed window, feeling the slow release of heat from the thick stone walls of their dwelling. In the wealthier homes, the embers in the kitchen hearth have long died, and the only sounds are the gentle stirring of slaves in their quarters or the sigh of the wind through the columns of a moonlit courtyard. The city breathes. It's a slow, ancient breath, carrying the weight of its history and the dreams of its million inhabitants. The trials of the summer day are over, replaced by the quietude of the night. The heat, though not entirely vanquished, has loosened its grip, allowing for a measure of peace. Let the gentle rhythm of this ancient Roman night guide your own thoughts towards rest. The concerns of that distant time, the struggle against the summer sun, all now just echoes in the vast corridors of history. Allow the quiet, the imagined coolness of the marble, the soft whisper of the night breeze through ancient Roman pines, to draw you down into a calm, deep sleep. The city is resting, and so can you.